This conference application that we're going to be talking about today, actually the story around this starts in January of 2019, and this is a picture from the event. It was RNA 2019, and RNA stands for React Native Amazon. React Native Amazon is a React Native conference internally to Amazon, and it's been going on now for about 2 years, and we're going to be doing it again next year. And React Native Amazon 2019, the second edition, was the one that I was kind of a part of. So I had an opportunity to help be one of the organizers. And it was the first year that we actually had external speakers come and kind of present at this event. So at Amazon, we use React Native internally and externally on a lot of our outward-facing apps quite a bit. A lot of the apps that you use from Amazon actually have React Native running within them. The entire Alexa app recently was rebuilt using React Native, and we just really, use React Native quite a bit. Also, we use a lot of React. So we had last year around a total of 350 total attendees, and at the events within Amazon that we hold, they're a little different than an event like this. When you come to a conference like this, you come and you probably stay the entire 2 days, and you're kind of like going to all the different dinners and people are getting coffee together and hanging out. But when we have an event in Seattle, for example, unless someone comes from out of town, a lot of times they might just come for like 1 day or two talks or just like one talk. And then since the event is typically held in one of the buildings like close by, they can just kind of like come and go as they please. So it's kind of different in the sense that you don't see the same people all the time and people kind of come and go. And then next year, for 2020, we're holding another React Native conference, and we're actually merging it into React Amazon. So we're going to have a full React Native conference and a React conference all within the same week. So we're looking forward to that, and we're already planning that. So last year, we had a couple of people that came from Facebook. So Peter came and talked about performance. We had Valentin come. He also kind of had a talk about performance. Performance was one of the big issues that we wanted to talk about, and we kind of had a lot of talks around that within Amazon. And then Gant was there. He gave his talk about machine learning. And my talk was the talk that we're going to kind of like dive into a little bit today. And it was called Rebuilding the RNA Conference App with React Native and AWS Amplify. So the RNA app looked something like this. We had a couple of main tab views. We had a schedule view, a profile view, and an info view. We just had the basic stuff that you would expect from a conference app. Information about the talks, information about the event, and a way to kind of like look and update your profile. So the specs around this were we needed a way to have users sign in and sign up. We needed a way to have users to be able to like look at their profile and edit their profile. We had a way for them to query, or for the app to query talks, all the different talks that were part of the event. And then we had a way for people to actually create and initiate discussions within each talk. And this is kind of the thing that we're going to be really focusing on here in this talk here, because that ended up adding like a really cool dynamic effect to the event, and everyone really enjoyed that. And then we had a real-time feature that allowed the app to kind of like listen to changes in real time. So when people added a new message, you didn't have to kind of refresh or scroll back and forth. The messages just kind of like came in real time. So my talk was kind of about how can we build this quickly using the tools at Amazon. And even though that a lot of the people that were at the event, pretty much all of them, worked at Amazon, there's so many different services within AWS, we don't really have knowledge about everything. So a lot of the people that were coming to this event had no idea about the tools that we were using, like Amplify and AppSync. So the basic requirements for this app, we needed a way to have user management. We needed a database to store the data about the different talks and the comments. And then we needed some API to interact with this data. So for me, this is the stack that I used. Considering that it was an Amazon conference, I did use all AWS tooling. So we used Amplify for the data, the entire back end, front end to kind of like create and initialize the different services. And then for the user management, we use Amazon Cognito, which is a managed authentication service similar to Auth0. And then for the API layer, we use GraphQL with AppSync. Really, though, this stack could have been anything that combined an authentication service with some type of GraphQL API. So you could have used Auth0. You could have used that with something like Apollo, Hasura. Prisma, anything that is basically a combination of, just an identity management system and a GraphQL backend. But the most interesting thing about this app that we really enjoyed was this ability to have discussions. So within the discussions panel, we did a couple of things. We first of all just allowed people to talk to each other. We also did a couple of Q&As, and then within the Q&As, we would take audience questions and kind of like go back and forth. But we would also take discussions and questions within the app, so people could like ask questions there. And then we also encouraged people afterwards, if they needed to kind of have questions that came up, the speakers would go back and check the different discussions and kind of interact with the people that had these different questions. So this turned out really well, and we also had an incentive for some of the people that attended. We have these different phone tool icons at AWS and at Amazon in general. So if you work at Amazon, you have this portal where you can like see your user profile, and we have a gamification mechanism, I guess you could call it, where we have these phone tool icons, and people kind of like compete on who can collect the most icons. So you'll get an icon for like speaking at a conference. You'll get an icon for like presenting at a meetup or just participating in different things. So we had a phone tool icon that part of it was interacting, in the discussions around the conference. So what I first did to recreate this app is I went ahead and created a data model. So we really wanted to have two main types of data. We wanted to have a talk, and we wanted to have a discussion within a talk. And a discussion within a talk would be basically a comment from within a talk. And then we had a relationship between the talks and the discussions. So you would create a talk, and then you would create discussions within a talk. And to kind of do this within, the short amount of time that I had for the event, we basically rebuilt this from scratch using Amplify. So this is the series of commands that I ran, Amplify init. To add the authentication, I ran Amplify add auth. To add the API, Amplify add API. And then to deploy the backend, Amplify push. And really, at the end of the day, the app that we ended up with had really only a couple of extra dependencies. We had the Amplify libraries. We also had React Native Snap Carousel to kind of switch between the views between the talk and the discussion. And then we had a navigation library, which was React Navigation. Now, at the end of the event, me and Gant got to talking, and we were like, this would be a really cool feature to have in the Chain React app, because I've been to Chain React now three years in a row, and we decided that we were going to go ahead and try to add this functionality to the app. And that's kind of where this talk originated from. And this is a talk that I'm presenting here, hooking up a conference in real time with GraphQL. And my name is Nader, I'm a developer advocate. I'm an author, and I'm a self-proclaimed futurist. So if you were here in the first Chain React, you saw my talk, JavaScript Futurism, that I kind of switched up at the last moment, and some people liked it, some people hated it. But yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter, GitHub, or Medium, I'm Dabit3 on all of the different social media platforms. So what the challenge was for us was we wanted to update the existing Chain React app to add this real-time functionality, the real-time discussions. So we wanted to literally take the 2018 version of the app, copy all of the UI and all that stuff, but we just wanted to kind of like swap out the back end to now use our GraphQL API and then add this new view for discussion. So how can we do that? So let's take a look at the app as it is, or as it was. You have really the main views that show the different schedules. This is kind of like the entry point that a lot of people use, where you can kind of view each day, and then you have the ability to drill down into each talk or each workshop. And then when you drill down, you get information about the speaker, information about the talk, and things like that. So what we wanted to first do was we wanted to remodel the data. So what would the data look like if we wanted to remodel it for something like this? So what we ended up doing is we ended up expanding that base schema that I showed you earlier. So now, instead of having just a talk and a comment, we now created a speaker type, because we thought maybe a talk will have multiple speakers. We wanted to have a way to create an array of speakers and then maybe reuse that speaker within other talks. So we created three types: a talk type, a comment type, and then a speaker type. So that's kind of like the base, that's the base where we started from. But that doesn't get into all the complexities around relationships and things like that. So how did we integrate that? We There's a couple of ways to do that. You could like hand roll your own GraphQL resolvers, write your code that interacts with whatever data source you're using. But since I was using Amplify, we actually have some transformations that are part of this GraphQL transform library that I used. And the ones that I used, I guess you would say, are @model and @connection. @model allows us to basically create a base type, and then we take some assumptions and we deploy additional GraphQL schema. We deploy the resolvers that go along with the operations in that schema, and then we also deploy the database. So we could create a type of talk that would create the CRUD operations around the talk, so create, update, delete, and list talks. And then it would create the resolvers that map to a database. And then the other one that we used was connection, because when you're creating relationships in GraphQL, it's actually pretty complex logic a lot of times you have to write, depending on the database that you're using. So with @connection, you can actually map two fields to each other, and then we can create a relationship in the database and a relationship in the resolvers to interact with the data source. So we basically took the base type and just decorated it with its @model. So that was kind of the first step. And then we added the @connection to then create the connections between the different types or the different fields. So the two fields that we really needed relationships around were the speakers and the comments within the talk. So a talk could have multiple speakers. A talk can have multiple comments. So we added a speaker array and a comments array, and then we added the connection along with the base type of speaker and the base type of comment. So we don't need, at this point, a authentication service. So all we needed with this API, so what I did was I cloned the chain react repo, so git clone. I initted a new Amplify project. I added the API. I deployed the backend. And then on the client, we needed a way to interact with the GraphQL API. So you can use Apollo. You can use whatever you like. But we also have a GraphQL client that's part of the Amplify library that does a lot around sending the proper headers that AppSync requires. So I used the Amplify library for that. And this is kind of how a GraphQL operation looks in Amplify. If you've ever used something like Fetch or Axios, it's a similar API to that, so it's not like what you might have been used to if you're using something like Apollo. So we basically call the GraphQL API using the API.GraphQL operation, and then that just returns the data, and then we can do what we like with that comments data. So we've modeled the data. Now we do have the question of identity, because in the RNA app, we had a way for people to sign in and sign up. So what could we do around some form of identity in this app? So the first thought was, should we add authentication to the Chain React app? I'm not a big fan of signing up to a million things, and it's another thing to add additional friction to an existing app that didn't have this in the first place. So kind of the first thought was like, should we do this or should we not do this? Ultimately, it was decided we shouldn't probably do this, because some people just want to download the app, use it. We don't want to create a new account somewhere, so we just opted out of that. Instead, what we did, we automatically assigned an identity to every user, and the way that we did that, we just created an array of animals, an array of colors, created a random number, and then kind of concatenated all of that into an identity that we assigned to the user when the app loads. So color, animal, number, that's kind of when you open the app, you'll see something like this. Corn, silk, squirrel, 11. So that's the code that created that. And then we gave users the ability to edit this basic generated name, because what if you actually want to use your real name? So let's give them the ability to do that. So we added the edit button so people can do that. All right. At this point, the app was done, right? We were pretty excited about this. I was like a month out, and I was like, yeah, this is awesome, because I have so much work to do. I'm traveling a lot and stuff like that. Didn't have any more work. And then Jamin messaged me on Slack, and he was like, what if we have bad actors? What if someone comes in and says something in the app, and we need to kind of identify this person? What are we going to do then? You don't have any authentication. And he's right. I mean, he was just saying, what if certain people came in here and started acting crazy? I mean, you never know who's going to show up to your conference and what type of people are going to show up and do crazy stuff. So what we ended up doing was we needed a way to handle identity. And the way that we did that is we don't want people to sign in, so instead let's get some identity, some unique identity on each device. And the way that we did that is we used React Native Device Info. And React Native Device Info has this get unique ID method that just brings back, of course, the ID of the device that you're on. So what we did was we used this ID, we updated the GraphQL schema for the comment, and we can now associate every comment with a device. Okay, so we know the device that created it. We have some general idea around the identity of the user now. So updated the backend, changed the schema, amplify push. We're done, again. But we're not quite, because now that we have all this stuff, all this information, we don't want to actually go into the database and like look at all the comments and do all this stuff. So how can we moderate this? We decided to create a dashboard, and in the dashboard we had this report that people could create from the client app, and then we would have a way to kind of moderate those reports. So I created another GraphQL type. This type had the fields of comment ID, so we wanted to get the ID of the comment that was reported. We wanted to get the string that is the actual comment. We wanted to get the title of the talk, because it just kind of helps us visualize what's going on. And then, of course, we wanted to have the device ID for the device that created the report and of the actual report. This is kind of how the dashboard ended up looking. We ended up using the int design library, so it kind of only took maybe an hour or two to kind of throw this together, because we already had all the GraphQL operations, right? We were already using most of that on the client. We just kind of like queried the data and then have a couple of operations to delete, dismiss a report, which basically means that this is a false report. We had a way to delete a comment, which dismisses the report and deletes the comment. And then we have a way to block the device. And when you block the device, you can still see the app, but you can't actually interact with the comments anymore. So I'm going to do a quick demo of what the dashboard looks like. So I deployed the dashboard here, and we have a couple of moderators, myself, and then a few other people here. So if I wanted to go here and I see a comment that isn't proper, so I can just go here, click reports, and then we report the comment, and then we see that the comment comes up here. And this is a false report because it's actually not that big a deal, so I'll go ahead and dismiss the report. So that's kind of how the dashboard looks. Right now, there are no reports, thankfully. Oh, there's one. So this looks good, so I'm going to go ahead and dismiss that. I'm going to come back, and I'm sure later I'll come back to 1 million of those, so I'm just going to act like... Okay, cool. So we have that. So what about the real-time functionality around this? So of course, you know, the title of this talk was real-time. And because we're using GraphQL, the easiest way, of course, is just to use GraphQL subscriptions. And if you've ever written your own GraphQL subscriptions, you've kind of know what the process is around implementing this stuff in your back end. And if you've used a service like Hasura or like AppSync or whatever, that you know that some of that stuff is actually kind of offloaded for you and handled for you. So what we needed to do at this point, we wanted the dashboard to update in real time. So as you just saw, when someone creates a report, the dashboard just kind of updates in real time. Also in your app, when someone creates a comment, you see the comments come through in real time. So we needed 2 GraphQL subscriptions, one for when a comment is reported and one for when a comment is created. So we had the onCreateComment and onCreateReport subscriptions. So when someone creates a report, we don't care anything about the actual place in the app that they are. We want to have a list of all reports. It doesn't matter where they are. So we don't take any arguments there. But for when someone creates a comment, we actually need to know the comment that they are commenting on, or the talk that they're commenting on. So we did take an argument there. That takes the talk ID, so we know which comment array to subscribe to. So the way that we did this in AppSync is it's actually pretty easy to add a subscription. You can actually use this AWS_subscribe decorator or directive, and using this, you can then pass in an array of mutations that you would like to subscribe to. Typically, GraphQL subscriptions are event-based, so you might want to subscribe to an event like onCreate, onUpdate, or onDelete. So that's kind of typically what you see. So we wanted to subscribe to a create comment or a create report. So that's the only item we passed into the array. So now we have the subscriptions up and running. And that's really about it. Now to implement the real time on the client, we have the API category, again, we're calling API.GraphQL. Before, though, when we called API.GraphQL, this is asynchronous, and we were basically returning a promise, and we were either saying .then, or we were doing async await, and then getting that data and doing something with it. When you're using the subscriptions, though, you call .subscribe. This will give you a way to specify a next function, and then within this next function, you have this function will be invoked anytime a new comment is created. So here we have the next function, and then we're passing in the event data that gets passed in whenever a new comment is created. We then have to handle that data on the client. So what we do is we destructure the actual comment off of the event. We check to see if the client that created this comment is the actual client that you're on. So if you created a comment, you don't want to subscribe to that. You want to discard that data as it comes through because you don't want to have duplicates, basically. So we discard the data if you were the one that created it. We then update the comments array, passing in that new comment, and then we just call set state. So that's about it. If you want to see the code for all of this and deploy this app yourself, we have 3 repos, one for the Chain React app repo, one for the RNA comp app that I presented last year, and then we have the Chain React admin panel that you can check out. I also have a project that's RN Conference in a Box, React Native Conference in a Box. It's a way for you to kind of deploy a conference that's agnostic of the conference that you're at. So you can actually deploy all of this back in and have the React Native app up and running. It's actually working. I just need to touch up the UI a little bit. So I'm probably going to open source that next week in a blog post and in a GitHub repo. So you can literally just clone the app, run Amplify init, and it'll deploy the back end. And you can then go in and like change the name of your conference or whatever if you want an app like this. I also want to thank everyone at Infinite Red that helped me with this, especially Robin Hines. She's actually the one that did most of the good work on the app that makes it look good and fix all the bugs that I created. All right, thank you. That's it.